The first ray of sunlight slipped through the loose curtain and tickled Tammy's nose. She squeezed her eyes shut in her sleep, stretched and sneezed. Opening her eyes with a sweet yawn, she patted the space next to her. Garrett was already gone. Again, Tammy muttered to herself. He left me at the crack of dawn without waking me. Lately, Garrett had been working nonstop. He was back at the office, busy with big projects, and practically lived there. He came home late, slept for a few hours, and rushed back to work. Tammy pulled on her robe and went to the kitchen. She had prepared her husband's breakfast the night before, but the stuffed pancakes remained untouched. Again, he had only grabbed coffee. "Oh, Garrett," Tammy sighed. "You're working too hard, poor thing." She had tried to wake up early to see him off, but this morning, she had overslept. He hadn't bothered to wake her either. "At least I made breakfast last night." "But what for? He didn't even taste it," she mumbled. Shaking her head, she added, "Well, at least I'll make sure Rosalie eats." Tammy peeked into the nursery. 10-year-old Rosalie was still asleep, cuddled up with her teddy bear. Tammy smiled softly. What a sweet sleeper. It's almost a shame to wake her up. Deciding to let her sleep a bit longer, Tammy returned to the kitchen. She put the pancakes in the microwave, poured milk into a pot, and turned on the stove. For a moment, her mind drifted. How many years had her mornings started this same way? Her husband rushing off to work, her daughter getting ready for school, and her in the kitchen, always in the kitchen. "Yes, I'm a housewife now," she muttered to herself. "But 12 years ago, things were different. I had such big dreams for the future." Suddenly, the milk in the pot boiled over, sizzling loudly. Tammy snapped out of her thoughts. "Enough of these memories," she scolded herself. "It's time to make cocoa." A few minutes later, the sweet smell of chocolate filled the kitchen. The pancakes were warm, and breakfast was ready. Tammy glanced at the clock. It was time to wake Rosalie. "Rosalie, sweetheart, time to get up," Tammy called from the kitchen. "Breakfast is on the table." "Mommy," Rosalie mumbled sleepily, clutching her teddy bear tighter. 5 more minutes." 1 minute, Tammy said firmly. "Come on, open your eyes and head to the bathroom." Rosalie groaned, then sat up in bed, yawning. "Mom, I had this dream," she said as she stretched. "We moved out of town. We had this huge, beautiful summer house like a palace. I was walking there, but I don't remember the rest. You woke me up." "I'm sorry, my dear," Tammy said, smiling. "You'll finish the dream next time." "Yeah, right," Rosalie grumbled as she shuffled to the bathroom. "Between homework, school, and music lessons, I have no time for dreams or real life." "Your slippers are in the bathroom," Tammy called out, laughing. About an hour later, Tammy saw her daughter off to school, which was conveniently right across the street. After kissing Rosalie goodbye, she decided to take her camera and go for a walk in the park. It was spring, her favorite season. Everything was blooming, filling the air with sweet scents and vibrant colors. Tammy loved taking pictures of nature and people. The apple trees in the park were stunning, dressed in their snow-white blossoms. The lilacs were vibrant, their rich purple flowers catching the sunlight. She strolled through the park, capturing every beautiful scene with her camera. At one point, Tammy sat on a bench to rest. She closed her eyes, listening to the birds singing in the bushes nearby. Suddenly, a small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mom, are you a photographer?" Tammy opened her eyes in surprise. A little boy about 5 years old stood next to the bench, looking at her curiously. "No, I'm not," Tammy said with a kind smile. "I just take pictures for fun." "Why?" the boy asked, raising his eyebrows. "Because it makes me happy," she replied. "I like keeping these memories." The boy nodded seriously, seeming to understand. Tammy couldn't help but smile at how adorable he was. "Would you like me to take a picture of you?" she asked. "Okay," he said shyly. "But only if you want to." "Of course. Who are you here with?" Tammy asked as she adjusted her camera. "I'm alone," the boy said casually. Tammy frowned. "Alone? Where's your mom?" The boy's expression softened. "Mommy's in heaven," he said quietly. "Daddy's working. I'm with Grandma now." Tammy's heart sank. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Why are you out here by yourself?" "Grandma sent me to the store to buy bread," he explained. "It's no big deal." "It is a big deal," Tammy said gently. "You shouldn't be running errands alone at your age." The boy shrugged. "I've been talking too long," he said suddenly, waving his arms in a funny way. "I need to go." He ran toward the nearby grocery store. Tammy watched him go, feeling a mix of admiration and sadness. What a brave little boy, she thought. But he shouldn't have to be this independent. She decided to wait for him to come back, wanting to make sure he got home safely. While waiting, she took a few more photos, capturing the beauty of the park. A few minutes later, the boy came out of the store, holding a loaf of bread. He hopped along the path, his blonde curls bouncing in the breeze. His carefree smile warmed Tammy's heart. Without thinking, she raised her camera and snapped a picture. "Mom, did you take my picture?" the boy asked as he ran back to her. "I did," Tammy said, showing him the image on her camera. "Do you like it?" "It's okay," he said, looking a little shy. "Can you make it into a card?" "I can," Tammy said with a smile. "Next time we meet, I'll bring you a picture. Now let me walk you home. My name's Tammy. What's yours?" "Eric," he said, smiling back. "I live in that building over there," he said, pointing to an old 5-story building nearby. "And I live in that new building over there," Tammy said, pointing in the opposite direction. "You live in a nice house," Eric said. "I haven't seen you here before." "My daughter and I just moved here," Tammy explained. "What about you?" "Dad and I moved in with Grandma," Eric said. "He works all the time, so I stay with her. There's no room for me at the daycare." They reached Eric's building, and Tammy promised to return in a couple of days with the picture. Eric promised to be there. Returning home, Tammy reflected on life's unfairness. Here was a good, wonderful boy with a hard life. His mother was gone, his father always working, and his grandmother likely ill. She thought about her own story. Tammy, too, grew up with her grandmother after her parents died in an accident. Grandma Ingrid had done everything to make sure Tammy grew up to be a decent person. She insisted Tammy attend art school after her regular classes, recognizing her talent for drawing. However, after graduating, Tammy became more interested in photography. Soon, a fashion magazine noticed her work and offered her a job. Tammy became a photojournalist. One day, she was assigned to photograph a young, successful businessman. After the shoot, he surprised her by inviting her on a romantic date. Tammy accepted, and that's how her romance with Garrett began. Tammy was overjoyed. Garrett was rich, handsome, and caring. When he proposed, she didn't hesitate for a second. But Grandma Ingrid wasn't as thrilled. "Oh, Tammy, this Garrett seems slippery," the old lady said. "Maybe you shouldn't rush. Get to know each other better." "Grandma," Tammy laughed. "Garrett isn't slippery. He's the best in the world." "Oh, I don't know," Grandma Ingrid sighed. A month before the wedding, Grandma Ingrid passed away. Tammy was deeply upset and wanted to cancel the wedding, but Garrett convinced her to go through with it. Guests were already invited, and the restaurant was paid for. Though sad about losing her grandmother, Tammy reasoned that Ingrid had lived over 70 years. She chose to listen to her future husband, as she would continue to do in the years to come. At first, Garrett insisted that Tammy stop talking to her school friends. It wasn't difficult. She only spoke to them once a year anyway. Then, he asked her to quit her job. Though reluctant, Tammy agreed. She was 3 months pregnant and wanted to focus on caring for her family. When Rosalie was born, thoughts of work faded entirely. For years, Tammy's life became centered around their home, a lovely 2-story house with nice furniture. What more did she need? She had a child, a husband, and wealth. Garrett earned good money as the director of a trading firm. But over time, Tammy began to feel trapped in her golden cage. She yearned to escape, even for a little while. She dreamed of returning to work at the magazine. However, when Garrett found out, he was against it. "My wife will stay at home," he declared. "Why should you bother? Don't you have enough money?" "Enough," Tammy thought indignantly. "But I want to pursue my career. All you do is cook, clean, and shop. And what about Rosalie? If you go to work, she'll be left alone all day," Garrett argued. "Tammy, that's reckless. A woman is first and foremost a mother and a wife. No, I won't allow it." Realizing she couldn't change his mind, Tammy gave up her dreams. Occasionally, though, she'd venture out with her camera, just for herself. That's how she met the precocious Eric. 2 days later, as promised, Tammy returned to the park with photos for Eric. He arrived right on time, grinning from ear to ear. "Tammy, you came," he shouted, running up to her. "Of course I did. I promised," Tammy replied, handing him the photos. "Oh, they're so nice," Eric exclaimed, admiring them. "Tammy, you're a professional." "A professional?" Tammy smiled sadly. "No, just a hobbyist." "Are you shopping again today?" she asked. No, I'm going to the pharmacy, Eric sighed. Grandma's sick. I need to buy her medicine. Will they sell it to you? Tammy asked, concerned. I don't know. Eric hesitated, looking uncertain. Let me help you, Tammy offered. What medicine do you need? Eric timidly handed her a list of medicines and some money. Put that away, Tammy said, pointing to the money. But why? Eric asked, confused. These medicines don't cost much, Tammy reassured him, though it wasn't entirely true. She wanted to help. It was clear Eric's family didn't have much. His clothes were old, though clean. Tammy bought the medicine and walked Eric home again. The next day, while Tammy was returning home with Rosalie, she saw Eric in the park with a tall, tired-looking man. The man, in his 40s, had slightly graying hair and a serious expression. Papa! Eric shouted, running toward Tammy. That's the lady, Dad. The man grabbed Eric's arm and looked at Tammy sternly. So it was you, he said. You're the one who took pictures of my son and bought his grandmother's medicine? Yes, Tammy stammered, caught off guard. Let me ask you something, the man said, his voice tight. What do you want with my child? You have a daughter, I see. We're just friends, Tammy replied. I wanted to help him. I'll ask you not to do that again, the man muttered, walking away with Eric. He glanced back at Tammy, his face filled with guilt and sorrow. Tammy couldn't calm her thoughts. Why had she felt so drawn to Eric? As she walked home with Rosalie, her daughter asked, Mom, who was that? Just a boy, Tammy sighed. Let's go home. I made your favorite berry pie. At home, as she watched Rosalie happily eat her pie, Tammy tried to push the encounter from her mind. That's it, she told herself. No more getting involved with strangers. This is why you shouldn't do good deeds for people. But deep down, Tammy knew the real reason she felt drawn to Eric. He reminded her of someone. 5 years ago, Tammy had lost a child during childbirth. It was her second pregnancy with Garrett. Everything had seemed fine, but complications arose during delivery. The baby was born fragile, and doctors warned he would likely be mentally impaired. They suggested giving him up. Tammy had refused, but Garrett convinced her otherwise. Tammy, we'll torture ourselves in him, Garrett said. Let's give him up. We'll have a healthy child later. This one, he probably won't survive anyway. Hearing these words, Tammy had a hysterical episode. They barely calmed her down, and in the morning, they told her the baby hadn't survived. Tammy collapsed from worry. She spent another month in the hospital and never saw the baby. Garrett buried Bobby, as Tammy had named him. Now Tammy visits Bobby's grave every year. God didn't send her and Garrett any more children, so there was only Rosalie. Yes, seeing Eric, Tammy felt herself reaching out to him involuntarily, like he was her son. That evening, Tammy told her husband about the boy and his father. Garrett listened, frowning. I'll never understand your desire to be good to everyone. Why do you need this kid? You have a daughter at home, a household, and yet you're wandering around parks, he muttered. Garrett, I go to the parks, as you put it, because my soul needs it. My hands itch for the camera, Tammy replied. They'd be better off reaching for the vacuum cleaner or the oven, Garrett said bluntly. Are you saying I'm a bad homemaker? Tammy asked, indignant. I'm not saying that. I'm saying your place is at home, not running around with a camera in the bushes like a teenager. Garrett, I just wanted to share this with you. That man got angry at me for no reason, Tammy said, her voice rising. Honestly, he hasn't scolded you enough, Garrett muttered. That night, they had a big fight. Tammy shouted that Garrett didn't see her as a person, just a housewife. Garrett, never one to mince words, shot back. Since you married a serious man, stop running around the city like a girl. In the end, Garrett slammed the door and left. Rosalie, who had overheard everything, came out of her room and hugged her mother. She wiped away Tammy's rare tears and whispered, Mommy, don't cry. You're the best. You take pictures better than anyone else. By the way, our class teacher said we need a photographer for graduation. Can you do it? Rosalie asked. Yes, of course, Tammy said, smiling through her tears. She pulled herself together. She already called me. You'll have a great photo shoot. Tammy was already asleep when Garrett returned that night. Their daughter was asleep too. Garrett looked into the bedroom and the nursery, then quietly headed for the living room. Taking his phone, he called someone and talked for a while. Afterward, he sat by the open window smoking. He seemed deep in thought, troubled by something. The next morning, Garrett left early as usual. Tammy, after seeing her daughter off to school, returned home. In the living room, She noticed Garrett's phone lying on the sofa. He had forgotten it. How can he manage without his phone? Tammy thought. She decided to take it to his office. On the way, she couldn't resist looking through his messages. At first, she found nothing interesting, but then she saw a strange message. "Tomorrow, I'm waiting for you at the cafe by the tower at 10 p.m. The message read. It had come late at night from an unknown number. Who scheduled an appointment with Garrett? Tammy wondered. Was it work? It doesn't seem like it. It's too late. Tammy decided Garrett would tell her everything himself. When Tammy arrived at Garrett's office, his secretary greeted her with a smile and offered her tea. "He has a meeting with a representative from a competitor company," the secretary whispered. "They're trying to find common ground." "Okay, I'll wait," Tammy said, nodding. The wait lasted about an hour. At first, everything was quiet in the office. Then raised voices could be heard. Evidently, the diplomatic conversation had failed. The competitors left, slamming the door. Tammy entered the office to find Garrett irritated and flushed. "What are you doing here?" he asked, raising his eyebrows in surprise. "You forgot your phone," Tammy said softly. "I thought you might need it during the day. Everything's upside down today." "I didn't even notice I'd left my phone at home," Garrett said. "Are you coming home early?" "I wanted to make something special," Tammy asked. "No, I'm sorry. I've got a lot to do," Garrett replied. "You're not going to work until late, are you?" Tammy asked. Garrett lowered his eyes and shook his head without answering. Doubt crept into Tammy's heart. Was her husband cheating? She couldn't stop thinking about the text message. Suddenly, everything seemed to fall into place. Garrett's late nights, early departures, and irritability, it all pointed to something. He definitely has a mistress, Tammy thought. That evening, Tammy decided to follow her husband. She went to the cafe mentioned in the message. She found a table far from the entrance, hidden behind a large aquarium that shielded her from view but gave her a clear line of sight. It was perfect. Tammy waited. She knew immediately when the other woman arrived. A tall, slender brunette entered the cafe, looked around disdainfully, and sat at a window table. Soon after, Garrett walked in and headed straight for the brunette. Tammy's first impulse was to jump up, confront them, slap Garrett, and claw at the woman's hair. But she restrained herself. Garrett smiled at the brunette and sat beside her. Tammy couldn't hear their conversation. She could only see Garrett's back and the woman's sweet smile. Her heart pounded. Tears welled up in her eyes. I wonder what he'd say if I went over there now, Tammy thought. But her legs felt like cotton. She had no strength to stand. Instead, she decided to call him. The phone rang, but Garrett rejected the call. He was engrossed in conversation with the brunette. Tammy dialed again. Yes, dear? Did you want something? Garrett asked, sounding slightly annoyed. Hi, Garrett, Tammy said as quietly as possible. Where are you now? Tammy, I'm in a meeting. It's not a good time to talk. I'll be home late, he said and hung up. He'll be late at a meeting? What a liar, Tammy thought. For years, Tammy had been sure Garrett loved her. They had been through so much together. And now this? For what? Tammy thought bitterly. Because I gave him the best years of my life? Because I slave away at home all day, not even hiring help, though we can afford it? Why did I give up my dream and quit my job at the magazine? Tammy pondered what to do next. Then, the brunette stood and headed for the exit, Garrett following her. Through the window, Tammy watched her husband open his car door for the woman. She smiled at him, and he smiled back, saying something. Traitor, Tammy whispered, wiping tears from her face. You'll regret this. A thirst for revenge gripped her heart. She didn't know how yet, but she was determined to make her husband pay for his betrayal. Should I confront him now? But what did I actually see? Just my husband sitting with another woman in a cafe, Tammy thought. He'll easily justify it. He'll claim it was a business meeting. Never mind that it's 11 at night. He'll deny they were smiling at each other and make it sound believable. Tammy had no doubt about that. Now a storm raged in her soul. So, while I cook his meals and iron his shirts, he's out having fun with other women? Telling me to stay home. He's made himself quite comfortable. Tammy decided to catch him red-handed and confront him with proof. She ran out of the cafe and hailed a cab. Follow that black Audi, she commanded the driver. The older man nodded. Are we following someone or catching up? He asked. Following, I think. My husband, Tammy replied. The driver shook his head but smoothly merged into traffic. Surprisingly, the old car kept up easily, and Garrett's car remained in sight. Tammy couldn't understand where her husband was going. There are no hotels in this area. Is he really going to that girl's home? He's got some nerve. Soon, Garrett's car turned into an alley and stopped at the maternity hospital. Tammy's heart clenched. This was the hospital where she had given birth to Bobby. The girl got out of the car, waved to Garrett, and lightly ran up the steps of the building. So she works here? Tammy muttered. Let's get out of here, please, she told the driver. Can you take a roundabout way so I can be home before my husband? The old driver nodded, understanding. Tammy had already changed into her home clothes when she heard the door lock click. Garrett stepped into the house, acting as if nothing had happened. Hello, dear, he smiled. I'm so tired today. Such a hard day. Will you feed me? Eat whatever you find in the refrigerator, Tammy said indifferently and went to her daughter's room. She decided to sleep with her. She couldn't bear to look at Garrett. Garrett watched her go with a surprised expression, but didn't say a word. In the morning, Tammy purposefully stayed in bed until Garrett left for work. Then, she got up and woke her daughter. Rise and shine, sleepyhead, she said with a smile. Only 1 week of school left. That's right, Rosalie smiled, stretching. How great. Dad will take a vacation. Where will we go this year? Dad's been quiet about it. I don't want to go to the sea. Maybe the mountains. Maybe the mountains, Tammy replied absent-mindedly. Now, let's get ready for school. We need to find out everything about the photo shoot today. The rest of the day was busy with preparations for Rosalie's 4th grade graduation. Garrett, as usual, stayed at work late. Tammy remained silent, though seeing him was difficult, especially while imagining him with someone else. Naturally, Garrett missed Rosalie's graduation, citing his workload. Rosalie pouted a little, but her mom arranged such a wonderful photo shoot and celebration with help from the other parents that the girl soon forgot her dad's absence. The important thing is that you were here, Mommy. You're wonderful, Rosalie said when they returned home. Thank you, sweetie, Tammy smiled. But her smile quickly faded when she saw the brunette leaving their building. Was she really in our apartment? If Garrett is home, she must be, Tammy thought. Sure enough, Garrett opened the door for them, wearing his robe after a shower. Hello, my girls, he smiled. I had an accident today. An accident? Rosalie asked, horrified. Not a car accident. At work. The secretary spilled coffee on me, twisted her ankle, and the cup fell right on my white shirt. I'm not sure if it can be washed. Just throw it away, Tammy replied indifferently, her mind on the brunette. How long have you been home? Tammy asked. About 10 minutes. I thought I'd take a quick shower, given the circumstances, Garrett replied. I see. Tammy smirked and said nothing. She took the ruined shirt and tossed it in the trash can in front of her surprised husband. Couldn't you at least try to wash it? It's a good shirt, Garrett said, confused. But Tammy seemed not to hear him. She kept thinking about the brunette. Garrett's home entertaining a mistress, Tammy thought bitterly. Well then, I'll start a hunt, a photo hunt. It was convenient because Rosalie was going to her friend's house for a few hours, supervised by the friend's parents. After dropping her daughter off, Tammy went to her husband's office. She hired another cab driver. The rest of the day passed without incident. Garrett didn't leave the office. But at 7 p.m., he came out and drove to the same cafe. Tammy managed to photograph her husband with the brunette. They met, and the girl kissed Garrett on the cheek. They sat at a table, and this time Tammy clearly saw their relationship was far from professional. But who is she? Tammy wondered. Not knowing her, Tammy decided to go to the maternity hospital where Garrett had first driven the woman. The next day, Tammy sat in the head doctor's office, holding a photo of the brunette with her hand on Garrett's shoulder. What did you want from La? The head doctor asked. I want her to stay away from the man sitting next to her, Tammy replied. He's my husband. I love him, but I can see he's infatuated with Amara. Have you talked to your husband? No. I'm struggling. I don't know where to start. I don't want to lose him, but I can't bear this situation any longer. I thought you, as her employer, could influence your employee. I'll try. The doctor nodded and looked carefully at Tammy, then at the photograph again. Listen, I think I've seen you before. You and your spouse. Yes, I'm Tammy Kingler. 5 years ago, my baby died in your clinic. I would never come here, but your employee is being more than provocative. Kingler? The doctor's face changed as he remembered. Yes, I recall. It's a pity it happened like that. Don't worry about Mara. She's a good pediatric nurse, but she's quite the flirt. If she's having an affair with your husband, I'll put her in her place quickly. I doubt it, Tammy smirked. But at least try. Tammy left the clinic and froze on the building's porch, her heart pounding. 5 years ago, she had felt terrible here, and now her emotions were no better. Is that why I came here in the first place? To hope that this brazen nurse can somehow be stopped? And Garrett, how do I keep living with him? Tammy rounded the corner and sat on a bench near the building. She closed her eyes. Then, she heard a woman's voice from a nearby open window. Hello, Garrett, Tammy heard. It's me. Listen, your wife came here. Turns out she thinks we're having an affair. Tammy cautiously peered through the window and saw Mara. She was standing half-turned, looking at herself in the mirror while talking on the phone. All these years, you know I wouldn't mind hooking up with you, but you're resisting for some reason. Why? Oh, stop yelling, Garrett. Don't get so worked up, Mara added. Hearing this, Tammy recoiled and pressed herself against the wall. So, Garrett's not cheating on me. And I was making it up. Tammy felt relieved. But what she heard next froze her in place. Garrett, the head doctor recognized your wife and yelled at me. For what? For communicating with you. What if she figures it out? She thinks your son is dead. What if, purely hypothetically, she gets an idea? Garrett shouted something into the receiver. Mara made excuses, but Tammy wasn't listening anymore. Everything suddenly blurred before her eyes. She didn't know how long she sat there until someone touched her shoulder. Tammy looked up to see an elderly woman in a white coat standing next to her. She looked like a nurse. Honey, are you feeling ill? The elderly woman asked kindly. Should I call a doctor? No, thank you. That won't be necessary. Tammy shook her head. A doctor can't help me. What's troubling you? I just realized the man I loved has betrayed me. Did your husband cheat on you? Don't worry, he'll come back. They're all like that. Once he sobers up, he'll return to his wife and kids. If only that were the main problem, Tammy said bitterly. She looked at the elderly woman's kind face, and a thought struck her. Excuse me, but have you been working at this maternity hospital for long? Yes, for half of my work life. I can see you're a good person. There's something I need to know. It's a long story, but could you please spare me half an hour? My name is Tammy. And you are? Mrs. Mahone. I've just finished my shift. I can give you some time. Soon, they left the hospital grounds together. Tammy suggested sitting in a cafe, where she recounted everything she had overheard through the open window. You say your last name is Kingler? Mrs. Mahone repeated, as if trying to remember. You were here 5 years ago. I recall a woman with such a last name. Yes, it was a complicated case. All the doctors were anxious. It was their fault. The baby had a problem. The woman had to have a cesarean section, but they made her deliver naturally. There was something wrong with the baby, but he was alive, that's for sure. And also, I heard the doctor say the baby should be transferred to an orphanage because the parents refused to take him. I wonder why they refused. The baby looked pretty normal. Are you certain there were no fatalities, Mrs. Mahone? Are you sure you're not confusing this with another case? I'm not confusing anything. For the past 5 years, everyone at our maternity hospital has survived. There were weak babies and mothers with complications, but everyone survived. So my Bobby is alive, and Mara was talking about my baby. She's involved in this. And the head doctor. And Garrett. Oh my God. Garrett has been hiding the truth from me all these years. And he's been talking to this Mara, Tammy thought. All that Mara, she's trouble. As for the baby, Tammy, I'll find out more. I promise. Don't tell your husband anything yet. My daughter has been working in an orphanage for a long time. Maybe she can tell me something about your baby. I don't know anything about him, Tammy sobbed. I just named him Bobby. I don't even know his blood type. But you remember his birth date, don't you? Of course. It was September the 5th. All right. September the 5th, 5 years ago. I'll check with my daughter. They exchanged phone numbers and said goodbye. Tammy walked home, her legs heavy. She dreaded seeing her husband. She had so much to say, so much to ask, but Tammy feared hearing the whole truth. Worst of all, she had no one to confide in. Garrett had driven away all her friends, and she had no close people except for her daughter. The thought of Rosalie gave her some strength. Mommy! Rosalie ran into the hallway to greet her. Where have you been? I missed you so much. Yes, where have you been? Garrett called out irritably from the other room. I came home to find our daughter alone with nothing but sandwiches to eat. Tammy didn't answer her husband or even look at him. Lost in thought, she hugged her daughter and kissed her. Are you hungry, honey? A little, Rosalie admitted. But I had tea with Dad, so don't worry. I just came back from visiting Polly. Her mom saw me home. You're my clever girl. I'll cook something, Tammy said and went to the kitchen, still not glancing at her husband. Tammy, what's going on? Garrett followed her. Why aren't you talking to me? Where have you been all day? Do you really want to know? Tammy looked at her husband vacantly. Yes, he said, meeting her gaze. I don't understand your tone. Tammy wanted to voice all her suspicions, but restrained herself. It wasn't time yet. Garrett, I think you're cheating on me, she blurted out suddenly. Me? Garrett choked, then laughed. Tammy, what are you on about? Have you been watching too many soap operas? I work my fingers to the bone so you and Rosalie can have the best. When would I have time to cheat on you? Then who is Mara? Garrett's face changed for a second. Then he gave a surprised look, as if remembering. Mara? The brunette who works as a nurse? Oh, Mara, that's my classmate. Why are you asking about her? I saw you together yesterday at the cafe. Garrett's cheekbones reddened, and he became visibly nervous, but after a second, he pulled himself together. Yeah, she scheduled an appointment with me yesterday. A class is planning to get together this summer, so she called me to discuss the details, where we're going to celebrate, how, and so on. Garrett was lying on the fly, and Tammy realized it, but she pretended to believe him. You're not lying to me, are you? Oh, come on, love, Garrett smiled. I have only you in my heart. He put his arms around his wife and kissed her. Tammy wanted to push him away, to shout at him, to ask where their son was, but she restrained herself with the last of her strength. She just put her head on his shoulder, stayed silent for a while, then pulled away and went to prepare dinner. Tammy, is the incident over? Garrett asked cheerfully. Yes, dear. Tammy even smiled back at him, though her soul was in turmoil. Her mind was on one thing, whether Mrs. Mahone would find out anything or not. That night, Tammy had a dream. She was walking through a forest when suddenly a wolf stepped out of the bushes toward her. Tammy froze for a moment and looked into the beast's eyes. Then suddenly, she heard a child crying. Tammy shuddered, and the beast perked up. The wolf rushed toward the sound of the crying child. Tammy ran after him. In a clearing, a little boy sat crying, smearing tears on his dirty cheeks. He looked around helplessly. Mommy, he suddenly shouted when he saw Tammy. He got up and ran toward her. But the wolf was faster. The beast grabbed the child by the shirt and pulled him away. No, no, screamed Tammy. Don't touch him. Let him go. She ran after the wolf, screaming and crying. For a second, the wolf stopped and looked at her. Then Tammy realized it wasn't a wolf. It was Garrett. A second later, both the child and Garrett disappeared like fog. Give him back. Give him back, Tammy repeated, shaking. She woke up to Garrett shaking her shoulder. Tammy, Tammy, what's wrong with you? Garrett leaned over her. Wake up. She opened her eyes. Her head ached, her heart was pounding, and cold sweat beaded on her forehead. Her teeth hurt from clenching her jaw so hard. Was it a nightmare? Garrett asked, looking into her eyes. You were screaming terribly. Yeah, a scary dream, she said, exhaling. You were calling for someone. I didn't understand. I was dreaming about our son, Tammy whispered. Tammy, honey, it's been so long. Calm down, calm down. It's all gone. It's just a dream. Garrett held her close, cradling her like a child. Tammy quieted down, calming a little. Or maybe it was all in her head. Maybe what she had learned the day before was just a coincidence. But she had heard Garrett and Mara talking. Tammy pulled away from Garrett. It's okay. I'll go back to sleep, she said. She covered herself with a blanket and turned away from her husband. Soon, he lay down next to her, hugging her. Tammy wanted to throw off his hateful hand, but she didn't move. Let him sleep. She herself lay there until morning, sleepless and with an empty mind. In the morning, Garrett kissed her and went to work. Rosalie was still asleep in the nursery, and Tammy dozed off. She was awakened by a phone call. Mrs. Mahone called. Tammy, I found out something, but it's not a phone conversation. Come to my place at 1 o'clock, just as my daughter is coming over. She has something to tell you. Tammy immediately jumped out of bed and began packing. Then she calmed herself. There was still time. She went to the kitchen and prepared lunch. Mommy, what smells so good? Her daughter asked, rubbing her eyes. I made your favorite red soup. Let's wash up, eat, and then we'll go out. Where to? Wondered the girl. To a very nice grandmother. I met her recently. You'll sit quietly at her place while I talk to her daughter. Soon Tammy called a cab. At the appointed time, they arrived at Mrs. Mahone's house. The woman lived in the suburbs in a small but neat house, now surrounded by blossoming apple trees, lilacs, and cherry blossoms. Mrs. Mahone came out onto the porch to greet her guests. "What a grown-up daughter you have." Mrs. Mahone beamed. "Well, young lady, would you like to come with me to the vegetable garden? Your mom needs to speak with my daughter, and we don't want to disturb them. I just need to water the tomatoes and cabbage." "Tomatoes?" Rosalie asked, surprised. "Are they already red?" "No, sweetie, they're just little sprouts now. But in time they'll bear fruit," Mrs. Mahone explained. She took the girl by the hand, and they headed to the plants while Tammy entered the house. A woman in her 40s peered out from the tiny kitchen. She was slightly overweight, with her hair tied in a bun and wearing glasses. Tammy was taken aback. "What a sturdy daughter Mrs. Mahone has," she thought. "Hello," the woman nodded. "I'm Kathleen. My mother told me your story. To be honest, I shouldn't disclose such things, but this is a special case." Kathleen invited Tammy to the table, poured tea, and began her story. 5 years ago, I was appointed director of the orphanage. A boy arrived with a grim diagnosis. Doctors believed his brain was damaged due to a difficult birth. They considered transferring him to a specialized institution, but for some reason, it kept being postponed. As time passed, it became clear the baby was perfectly healthy, developing like any other child. Then, soon after, Gloria came to work at the orphanage. She was in her early 30s and immediately bonded with the abandoned child. Not long after, she set out to adopt him. She and her husband couldn't have children of their own. They had undergone lengthy treatment, but the issue was with her husband. Without money for IVF, they decided to adopt. Eventually, they managed to take the baby home. I don't know if it's your boy or not, but the birth center and date of birth match. Kathleen paused for a moment, then gathered her courage. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but Gloria passed away recently. Cancer took her in just a few months. Her husband, Marcus, and the boy were left alone. I know they've moved in with Marcus's mother. Everything would be fine, but Marcus started drinking heavily. His mother is ill, and the boy is left on his own." Tammy cried out suddenly, struck by a hunch. "What's the boy's name?" At the orphanage, they called him Eric. "Eric!" Tammy exclaimed. "Could it really be him?" "I don't understand," Kathleen said, puzzled. Tammy, confused but excited, told Kathleen about the boy she had met and photographed. She took out her camera, which she carried everywhere out of habit, and found the right photo. "Here. Is this him?" Tammy pointed at the image on the camera screen. "I remember him as very small," Kathleen admitted. "But he looks just like him. He's the same bright child." "Yes, very similar." Kathleen hesitated. She wanted to add that the boy looked like Tammy too, but stopped herself. What if it was all a mistake? "Mom, it turns out that tomatoes are so tiny at first." An enthusiastic Rosalie appeared in the doorway. "I was watering them. Mrs. Mahone said I could come back and help her water them again. We'll come back, won't we?" "Yes, yes, of course," Tammy replied, still shaken from her conversation with Kathleen. She looked at Mrs. Mahone. "Thank you. I just can't understand one thing. Why didn't you let me know earlier? Why did you suddenly volunteer to help me?" "It's an old score with the head doctor," Mrs. Mahone said with a sad smile. "I worked in that hospital all my life as a midwife before I retired. I was accused of negligence. They claimed a woman got serious health problems because of me. I was suspended from work and denied the benefits that medical staff are entitled to. But I wasn't to blame for that situation. The head doctor was operating on the woman, and it went poorly. Nobody would listen to me. So, if your story is true, that head doctor will finally be ousted from his position." "I see," Tammy replied. "You can be sure of one thing. If my son is alive, there will be consequences for everyone responsible in this story. Both the head doctor and my husband." Rosalie listened to the adults attentively, but understood nothing. "Mom, what son were you talking about?" the girl asked as they drove home. "Sweetie," Tammy said, coming to her senses. "I'll tell you everything, but a little later. Just don't say anything to Daddy yet about our visit, and don't mention anything you heard there, okay?" "Okay," the girl nodded. Tammy realized she had made a mistake by discussing such matters in front of her daughter, but there was no going back. Later that day, she persuaded Rosalie to walk a little more in the park. Her daughter agreed. Tammy hoped she would see Eric today. As if answering her prayers, there he was, running and jumping as usual. "Tammy!" he shouted joyfully, smiling. "Where have you been? Were you scared of my daddy that time? He's good, he just acts tough. Do you know what he did with the picture you gave me?" "What?" Tammy asked, feeling tense inside. "He framed it and hung it on the wall in the hallway. Grandma really liked the picture too. She said the photographer has real talent." "Thank you." Tammy laughed. "And this is my daughter, Rosalie." The girl nodded at the boy, looking at her mom, confused. "Rosalie, this is a good friend of mine," Tammy said. The boy sniffed endlessly, and Tammy noticed. "Do you have a cold, Eric?" Tammy asked, concerned. "It's summer. How did you catch a cold?" "I ate a lot of ice cream. Daddy got a new job, so we have money now." The boy smiled happily. "He bought me new jeans." Tammy noticed the boy's shirt was new too. Yes, the kid had dressed up. "You look great." Tammy smiled and took out disposable handkerchiefs from her purse. "Let me wipe your nose." She immediately and deftly did so. The three of them walked around a bit more. Tammy then ran to the pharmacy and bought Eric some vitamins. Afterward, they walked the boy home. "Good kid," smiled Rosalie. Tammy nodded thoughtfully. "Rosalie, will you stay home alone for an hour? I still have to go on an errand." "I'll be quick." "Okay, Mom." Tammy took her daughter home, then rushed to the private clinic where genetic analysis was done. The handkerchief she had used to wipe Eric's nose was suitable for examination. When Tammy returned home, she was met by a furious Garrett. "Where did you disappear to again?" he shouted. "The daughter is alone again." "Tammy, what are you doing? And where did you take my daughter during the day?" "Mom," I blabbed. Rosalie whispered innocently. "It's all right, sweetheart," Tammy said with an encouraging smile, and then turned to Garrett. "I had some errands. I went to see some good acquaintances." "What kind of acquaintances can you have that I don't know about?" Garrett demanded. "And what is this? You have a family, a husband and a child. You should be taking care of the house. And yet, dinner isn't cooked, the house is a mess." "The house is in order," Tammy replied calmly, "and the food is in the fridge. I'll heat it up." She went to the kitchen, but Garrett grabbed her arm. "What child are you looking for?" he asked angrily. Rosalie mentioned something. "Tammy, are you losing your mind?" "I'm more sane than ever," Tammy said, pulling her hand away. "And since you're asking, I'll tell you. Yes, I'm looking for my son. But he's gone." "Tammy, come to your senses," Garrett snapped. "No, you definitely need a doctor. We'll go to the doctor tomorrow. And you'll give him money to declare me incompetent, is that it?" Tammy shot back. "Garrett, how much did you pay the head doctor of the maternity ward to put our son in an orphanage?" Garrett shook when he heard that. Then he began to insist that Tammy had made everything up, that everything was as it had been, and that the child didn't survive. But Tammy didn't listen to him. She had no intention of proving anything. She had other thoughts in her head. It had been 10 days of waiting. During that time, she didn't talk to her husband. She walked with her daughter in the park, where they met Eric and had fun together. Eric told her about his family. His father worked all day at some computer firm. Yes, his name was Marcus. Tammy's heart twitched with excitement. So many coincidences. And Eric's grandmother seldom walked, only around the apartment a little. His mother's name was Gloria. Her life had been taken by a serious illness. Eric told her a lot about his life as they sat in cafes and walked around the city while Tammy waited. Finally, she received a call from the clinic informing her that there was a result. Tammy drove to the clinic with a sinking heart. What would they tell her? "I don't understand anything," she said excitedly to the lab technician who brought her the documents. Tammy read the numbers but couldn't believe it. "The results indicate that you and the person whose biomaterial was provided are close relatives." "How close?" "Like mother and son, for example." When Tammy heard that, she cried out. Then she wept. Yes, Eric is her son. It's her Bobby, whom she had been mourning for so many years, alive. That night, she decided to lay all the cards on the table before her husband. Garrett came home late as usual. Rosalie was already asleep. Tammy sat in the living room on the sofa, the DNA test results in her hands, studying them. Instead of greeting her, Garrett asked rudely, "What's this? You're still looking for trouble?" During these days, their relationship had completely deteriorated. "I found my son," Tammy answered calmly. "He's alive and well." "What kind of nonsense are you talking about now?" Garrett exclaimed. "You really need to go to the hospital. You're losing it." Without raising her voice, Tammy said, Maybe you can now tell me how you got rid of our son. You looked me in the eye for so many years and lied. You gave our child to the orphanage when I was between life and death. Garrett suddenly became pale. Then he took the documents from the clinic and read them. Well, why are you silent? Tammy tugged his sleeve. Look me in the eyes now and tell me that our Bobby is dead. How did you find him? Garrett asked in an unexpectedly hoarse tone. Mara and I spent almost 6 months looking for him. Oh, so it was you and Mara? Tammy demanded. What is there to tell? Garrett shrugged. When the doctor said that our son would be mentally disabled, I immediately decided that we didn't need that. We didn't want to torture ourselves or make him suffer. Mara worked at the maternity hospital in the children's ward as a nurse, Garrett continued. Yes, she really is my classmate. I talked to her. I told her that you didn't want to give up the baby. Then she suggested this option. Pay the head doctor for a death certificate. That's how it worked out. While you were unconscious, they gave me the certificate, and I buried an empty coffin. Then the boy was taken to an orphanage. So, while I was mourning him in the hospital, he was there waiting for me. Tammy could barely hold back her tears. And you lied to me. I meant well. Why would we need a disabled child? Garrett said coldly. You decided for me. You robbed me of my son. What does it matter what he is? I would have loved him anyway, Tammy said, her voice shaking. The most important thing is that he's a normal, good, bright kid. Doesn't it hurt your heart to know that your son is growing up with strangers? I've been following his fate all this time, Garrett said. Yes, a year later I found out he was adopted, and he seemed normal. Yes, I berated myself for this act, but what could I have done? So I decided to forget about it. Through Mara, I only found out how he was doing. And then the boy's foster mom died, and he and his foster dad disappeared. Mara and I looked for them, but we couldn't find them. Tammy grinned. She's been driving a wedge between us too. I admit she was even in our house when your secretary allegedly spilled coffee on your shirt. I saw her near our entrance. And then you in the house. Garrett shook his head. He couldn't admit it, but it was true. Mara had been in their apartment. They met to discuss where to look for the boy and his foster father. Garrett had run home for a minute to get some paperwork. Mara waited for him in the car. Then suddenly she came up to him. He opened the door, and she hugged him, pressed herself against him, and began to undress. It was an obsession, a mistake. Everything happened quickly, Garrett said. I told her I had to go. My wife would be here any minute. She smiled understandingly and left. Tammy was silent. Yes, he had cheated on her, but only once. But he couldn't admit it. Tammy, we were just looking for this child, Garrett stubbornly repeated. A boy, a child. You talk about him as if he were a stranger. Garrett, this is your own son. His name is Eric, Tammy said. Now I only have a daughter. Garrett raised his voice. Enough about it. Let him grow up in another family. Everything is normal with him. As I understand it, that's good. I won't leave it like that. I'll make sure my son grows up with me, Tammy exclaimed. Forget it, Garrett shook his head. And I won't allow it. If you raise a fuss, I'll divorce you. Divorce me and I'll take Rosalie, he added. The court will give me custody. What do you think you are? You're worthless, unemployed, living off me. You're nothing without me, Tammy chuckled. Aren't you the one who made me like this? But you're wrong if you think I'm so spineless. I'll leave you anyway and take my daughter away from you. That night, Tammy slept in her daughter's room. Although it's hard to call it sleep. The woman lay all night with her eyes closed, thinking about what she should do now. She couldn't live on like before. Garrett disgusted her, and Eric must be taken away. She wouldn't give up Rosalie. In the morning, Tammy opened her eyes as soon as the front door slammed behind her husband. Kissing her sleepy daughter, she carefully got out of bed and went to the window. A new day was beginning, and Tammy was starting a new life. She was getting used to the idea of having her son around. There was only a little bit left, and they would be together. According to Eric's stories, his adoptive family loved him, even though they lived simply. His father drank for a while, which was understandable because he had survived the death of his wife. But now it seemed to be all right with him. By lunchtime, when Rosalie was already watching a children's TV program in her room, Tammy made up her mind. Daughter, I'll go away for half an hour. Will you be okay alone at home? She looked at Rosalie, who nodded in response. Tammy had calculated everything. Garrett wouldn't be home for 7 hours, and Marcus, Eric's foster father, would come home at lunchtime. They needed to meet and talk. Grabbing the DNA test documents, Tammy headed toward the old 5-story building. Eric, a chatty boy, had long ago told her which entrance he lived in and which apartment. An elderly woman in a wheelchair opened the door. "Who are you?" she asked, surprised, blindly looking at the guest. "I don't know you." "My name is Tammy," the woman said worriedly. "Your grandson and I sometimes walk together in the park." "Ah, Tammy," the woman smiled. "Eric was talking about you. The picture you took was a good one. Come in." Eric ran to the neighbors and his grandmother said, "We're out of sorts. Marcus came for lunch, and I hadn't finished sorting the soup. As luck would have it, the salt shaker is empty." "Oh, Marcus is at home?" Tammy asked. "Then please call him. We need to talk." The old lady shrugged and shouted, "Son, come here." A tall man came out of the kitchen. He looked less gloomy now than he had at their previous meeting. "You wanted to talk about Eric?" he asked. "Forgive me for the harshness last time," he added. "I wasn't in a good mood." "Of course, you can communicate with him. I realize that you're a good person." "Thank you," Tammy whispered. "But I have something else to discuss with you. Could we talk privately outdoors? And by the way, pardon me for interrupting your lunch, but it's critical." "Yes, I've already realized that," Marcus grinned. On the landing, they met Eric. "Oh, Tammy," the boy said, surprised. "Hello." The woman almost burst out with "son," but she could hardly restrain herself. "I've come to talk to your daddy," she said. "What about?" the child asked in a businesslike manner. "Eric, what's with the interrogations?" Marcus grinned. "March to the apartment. Your grandmother is waiting for salt outside the entrance." The adults sat on a bench. Tammy got her courage and pulled out the papers. "Here's this." "What's this?" Marcus asked, confused. "It may seem absurd, but I'm Eric's birth mother," Tammy said. Marcus looked at Tammy, confused, then at the papers. Tammy, worried, immediately began her explanation. She told him everything as it had happened. Marcus listened, his head lowered. "I won't ask how you found us," he finally said. "But if you try to take Eric away from me, I won't keep quiet. I'll go to court." "Marcus, please understand. I'm in shock myself," Tammy tried to explain. "I don't want any litigation, especially since my husband isn't behaving appropriately in this situation. I just want to communicate with Eric." "And what will you tell him?" Marcus asked. "That you gave birth to him and abandoned him? Understand, he considers another woman his mother. Can you imagine what that would do to the child?" "I understand everything, and I don't know how to improve it," Tammy said. "That's why I came to you to talk. Together, we'll find a solution. I believe we can work it out together." "Are you kidding me?" Marcus asked. "You abandoned a sick child like an unnecessary kitten, and now you come to your senses?" "I didn't abandon him," Tammy said. "That doesn't change anything." "What do you want?" Marcus asked. "You want me to give you Eric. What do you want him for? You have a daughter, so raise her. Especially since, as you say, your husband isn't happy about finding your son." "I'll leave my husband," Tammy said firmly. "I'm not going to live with him after what happened anyway." "I don't need that information," Marcus said coldly. "And don't come to us anymore. I forbid you to see Eric." Marcus resolutely stood up and headed for the entrance without looking back. Tammy remained seated on the bench, seemingly petrified. Yes, Marcus could be understood, but who would understand her? 5 years ago, she was lied to and deprived of a child. And now, when she suddenly found him, it turns out she has no rights. And indeed, Eric considers that deceased woman to be his mother. Tammy cried. That's how she suddenly found her son, but at the same time couldn't get him back. Tammy slowly approached the house. At the entrance, she saw her husband's car. The next moment, her husband and Rosalie came out of the house. "Mommy!" the daughter joyfully shouted and rushed to Tammy. But Garrett intercepted her. "Go to the car," he commanded the girl. "And Mommy, I said get in the car." Garrett shouted and pushed Rosalie into the car. Then he turned to Tammy. "What did you think? You can behave however you please? Who do you think you are? You should have done what I told you to do. I told you to forget about that kid. What did you do? You ran straight to his foster dad. Were you crying over there, telling him what a bad husband I am? How do you know I followed you? I saw you sitting on the bench. How he sent you away. Anyway, it's like this. Rosalie and I are leaving now, and I won't tell you where, but I don't want to see you in the apartment. In 2 days, I'm divorcing you. If you try to stop me, I won't allow you to see your daughter. Do you understand?" "No. No, you wouldn't dare do that to me." Tammy screamed, crying. "What's my fault? You behaved like the worst scoundrel." You say you followed me, but didn't you want to look at your son? He's not my son. Garrett cut her off. At that moment, Rosalie was crying in the car. Garrett got into the car and drove away. Tammy rushed after her daughter, but then stopped, feeling empty. She fell to the pavement, sobbing uncontrollably. Her life had shattered into small pieces. How could she put everything back together now? Marcus was walking to work, agitated after his conversation with Tammy. What kind of a mother is she? Asterisk, he thought. Asterisk, poor unfortunate. No way, she's a cruel liar. Marcus remembered how he and Gloria first brought Eric home from the orphanage. He was just a baby then, but he grew stronger and developed well. The doctors had been wrong. The child was perfectly healthy and hit all his milestones on time. He talked, even babbled, and soon it was unstoppable. Everything in their family was fine until Gloria fell ill. At first, they thought it wasn't serious, but by the time the doctors figured it out, it was too late to do anything. Gloria died. Marcus had loved her so much. They had been together since high school. Gloria had waited for him while he was in the army. They had dreamed of a large, loving family, but that big family never worked out. When Marcus was left alone with a child in his arms, he felt so lost that he started drinking and quit his job. He had been a good programmer. His mother-in-law, assessing the situation, immediately insisted he move in with her. Marcus listened, and gradually he came to his senses and returned to work. He realized that Eric spent a lot of time alone and needed to go to kindergarten, and that his mother-in-law was very sick. But they would manage. Then suddenly, this biological mom showed up. All she said was a lie. Of course, she didn't give up her son. Those were the thoughts running through Marcus's head as he approached Tammy's house. He witnessed the whole ugly scene. Garrett pushing his daughter into the car and shouting at Tammy. What exactly did he shout? Marcus couldn't believe a father could talk about his own child like that. For a moment, he wanted to intervene and hit this creep, but Garrett drove away. Marcus walked up to Tammy and held out his hand. Tammy, please calm down. Don't cry, Tammy asked, surprised as she wiped her tears. What are you doing here? I was walking to my work. I saw everything, and now I believe you. He'd do a mean thing without blinking an eye. He'll take Rosalie away from me, Tammy sobbed. I don't know what to do. First, you need to calm down. Go home, Marcus said. Here's my phone number. Give me yours, and I'll call you this evening. Marcus handed her a torn notebook page and wrote down his number. Tammy dictated hers. Please don't cry. Believe me, as long as we're alive, everything can be fixed, Marcus said. He walked her to the entrance and hurried to work. The rest of the day, Tammy lay on the couch, curled up in a ball, unable to sleep or get up. Her strength had left her. She dialed her daughter's number several times, but the phone was out of range. Then she got a call. Daughter, Tammy shouted into the receiver without looking. Excuse me, it's Marcus, she heard a confused male voice. Ah, it's you. I'm sorry, Tammy sighed. I thought Rosalie was calling. I'm standing at your entrance. Can we talk? Marcus asked. Yes, come in, Tammy replied, giving him the apartment number. Soon, the guest was at her doorstep, looking a bit shaken. Put the kettle on in the kitchen, he said. You have a nice place, Marcus noted, looking around the apartment. It's not my apartment, Tammy replied sadly. It's Garrett's property, and he's kicking me out just like that. I thought I was going to leave my husband, but he threw me out and took my daughter away. Do you have somewhere else to go? Marcus asked. To be honest, I don't, Tammy admitted. You know, I'm so sick of it all. I don't want to live. But you have to live, Marcus said gently. You know, Tammy, I thought about what you told me and what I saw today, and I realized one thing. You can't resist fate. Let everything go as it goes. You'll see. Everything will work out. So Garrett is going to give me his daughter? Never, Tammy said, shaking her head. But you still have a son, and you won't give him to me. Moreover, I'm less now. Do you have anyone you can turn to for help? Tammy didn't answer. She only grinned sadly. Yes, over the years, Garrett had done everything to ensure she was alone and completely dependent on him. Marcus realized this without words. He thought for a while, then shook his head decisively. Pack up, he said. Tammy was confused. Where to? You'll stay with us. Mom won't mind, and Eric will be happy. You know, he's so attached to you. He always comes home from a walk and tells us how he walked with you, how he played with your daughter. He's drawn to you, and I can't live without him anymore, Marcus said. Tammy said quietly, nor without Rosalie. Mara said nothing. Now Marcus saw before him an unhappy young woman who had faced enormous lies and betrayal in her life. How could he help her? Marcus only had a vague idea, but on a purely human level, he couldn't help but respond to her pain. Tammy agreed to Marcus's proposal, and in a couple of hours, she was leaving the apartment where she had created a cozy family nest for so many years. She turned around to say goodbye. She left everything behind, taking only necessities: a camera, a picture of her daughter, and of course her documents. Helen, Marcus's mother, was very surprised when she saw the now familiar guest. While she and her son whispered in the kitchen, Tammy and Eric sat in the living room. The boy showed her his toys and books. Eric was so happy. "Where's Rosalie?" the boy remembered. "Will she also live with us?" Tammy sighed. "She's still with her daddy, but I hope we can see her soon. Meanwhile, let's look at this book together." She took out the alphabet book, and she and Eric began to study the letters. The boy already knew more than half of them. "What a good boy you are," Tammy admired. "A little more, and we'll be reading together." "Yes, Eric has a good memory," Tammy heard Helen's voice behind her. The woman stood in the doorway, watching attentively as the guest studied with her grandson. Marcus had told her everything. Now, looking at Tammy and Eric, she noticed how much they resembled each other. In the depths of Helen's soul, a hope stirred. Perhaps her son could get along with this Tammy. She wasn't much older than him. They would make a good couple, and Eric would have a complete family. 2 days passed. Tammy was adjusting to her new surroundings. She swiftly cleaned the apartment until it sparkled and cooked various delicious meals. The elderly woman appreciated her guest's efforts and began hinting to her son to take a closer look. But Marcus pretended not to understand his mother's intentions. Eric followed Tammy around, helping with cleaning and cooking. He had forgotten about his street life, only asking about Rosalie. Such questions pained Tammy's heart. She knew nothing. Rosalie's phone remained silent. Garrett had blocked her calls. Suddenly, Tammy saw her husband's car pull up to his house, and he stepped out with Mara. This infuriated Tammy. He had assured her that there was nothing between him and Mara, yet here they were, entering the apartment together. Tammy went to them. "What are you doing here?" Garrett asked rudely when he saw Tammy. "Where is my daughter?" Tammy blocked their path. "None of your business," he retorted. "I've already filed the documents with the court. You'll get a summons. The judge will determine when you can see your daughter. Don't be surprised. I know where you live. Good people informed me. Just a thought, you're a fallen woman, running to that man who's raising the kid. How are you doing with him?" "Am I a fallen woman?" Tammy sneered. "I didn't bring a lover into our apartment, unlike you. Look better at your mistress, who doesn't hesitate to have an affair with married men." Garrett exclaimed. "Mara, sweetie, what is she saying?" In truth, Mara was only feigning indignation. She was actually delighted. At last, Garrett was hers. She had achieved her goal after so many years. They were together. Back in the hospital, she had first whispered to Garrett that his son was born abnormal, telling all sorts of horror stories. While the doctors were cautious about the prognosis, Mara described to Garrett all the horrors of life with such a diagnosis for a newborn. So Garrett believed her and agreed to give up the child. Mara then personally brought him all the papers from the doctor and quietly settled the whole story. She hoped that after all this, Garrett would leave his wife and come to her. She would then give him a healthy child. But no, Garrett stayed with his family, which angered Mara tremendously. She decided to remain close to Garrett, learning about the boy and passing on news about him. She emphasized that even if the boy seemed healthy now, it didn't mean anything. The disease could manifest at any moment. All the while, she was working on Garrett like a cunning fox. He was like a rock at first, but water wears away stone. Finally, Mara got her way, and everything worked out perfectly. Now, Garrett would definitely leave Tammy. Of course, Mara was a bit upset that Garrett had taken away his daughter, but she reasoned that if the court granted custody to the father, she would convince Garrett to send the girl to the best boarding school. Let her live at a distance. "Garrett, she's insulting me," Mara added in a trembling voice. Garrett, his face purple with rage, glared at Tammy. "Don't you dare say anything bad about Mara. Forget your way here. We'll be divorced soon, and you can live with your puppy." "That puppy is your son too," Tammy said bitterly. "Though how many times must I say it, Garrett? I want you to hear it. I won't report to the police. I'll keep quiet about what happened in our family. But you should bring Rosalie back to me. Should I? Garrett sneered. Our daughter will live with me, and I don't care what you report to the police. I have such connections that you'll be silenced. That was the end of their conversation. Garrett and Mara entered the building, and Tammy watched them go. No, she wasn't crying or even angry. In her soul, a grand plan to destroy her husband had finally matured. She didn't want that. She had suggested they work things out calmly, but he wouldn't. That evening, Tammy asked Marcus how skilled a programmer he was. Well, people don't seem to complain. Marcus shrugged. Why do you ask? I want to access Garrett's accounting department at work. I think there might be some shady business going on there. What do you mean? I suspect there's some double bookkeeping happening. Decided to take down your husband. Marcus smiled. I didn't start this. Tammy replied thoughtfully. He's been yelling that I won't get any truth from the prosecutor's office or the police about the children, so I'll take another route. I need to access their accounting reports and send them to the tax office. Let them investigate. Meanwhile, I'll contact the magazine where I used to work. Who knows? Maybe they would like to get me back. Well, I won't try to change your mind. You're doing the right thing, Marcus said. That evening, Marcus managed to access the computers of both Garrett's firm's chief accountant and Garrett himself. Indeed, Tammy's suspicions were correct. A considerable amount of money was being funneled into fake accounts, and double bookkeeping was taking place. Tammy copied all the data and sent it to the tax office. Then she met with the editorial staff of the magazine. Tammy, it's a shame you left our publication. You're an excellent photographer, said the editor-in-chief. I wouldn't mind coming back, Tammy replied. But as I recall, your husband didn't want you to work. That doesn't matter anymore. We're getting a divorce. The editor-in-chief was very surprised and offered Tammy a job with probation. A few weeks had passed. I know he's having a lot of trouble at work right now, Tammy told Marcus one evening. It's not surprising. He always thinks only about himself. Apparently, the thirst for profit has turned his head, Marcus said. You did it cleverly, Marcus said. Now they'll give Rosalie to you for sure. By the way, do you know where she's been all this time? Yes, she called me. Garrett put her in a private boarding house to keep her out of the way. That's how much he loves his daughter. Rosalie cried, asked me to take her, and I promised we'd meet soon. Tammy paused for a moment, thinking. I should probably start looking for an apartment. Do you know if anyone's renting in your building? Why do you need that? Marcus was surprised. Well, how else? If they give me Rosalie, and I'm sure they will, we'll need somewhere to live. We can't make you feel cramped. Although, to be honest, it's already hard for me without Eric. We'll find something for sure, Marcus said. I'm worried about other things. You have a place to live, but what about a job? Garrett still has more financial opportunities. You think I visited the magazine editorial board for nothing? Tammy laughed. They hired me and offered a very decent salary. So I'm prepared for the trial. The divorce proceedings followed, and the court took everything into account. The recent events at Garrett's firm, his relationship with another woman, and more. In the end, Tammy and Garrett divorced, with their daughter staying with her mother. The court also considered the division of property, and Garrett had to pay Tammy almost half of everything. But this was her revenge. Mara shouted across the courtroom upon hearing the decision. For the fact that her son was given to the orphanage. What son? What orphanage? The judge asked, surprised. Mara, realizing she had said too much, tried to backtrack, but eventually burst into tears and told everything. Tammy, why didn't you say a word about this story? The judge asked sternly after listening to Mara. After all, you're the injured party. I didn't want to stir things up. Why should I? My son is with me now, and you've returned my daughter. I don't want to take revenge on anyone. Life will sort itself out. But now the prosecutor's office will handle this, replied the judge. Mara shrieked when she heard this, and Garrett turned pale. What a fool, he whispered to Mara, as she dissolved into bitter tears. Some time passed after these events, and soon Tammy and Garrett met in court again. Mara and other maternity hospital employees, including the head doctor, were there. All of them were visibly disturbed, and for good reason. As a result, the head doctor lost his position and received a sentence for several years. Mara received a suspended sentence. Garrett, however, avoided criminal responsibility this time, getting off with compensation for moral damages to Tammy. The amount was substantial, equivalent to the cost of their former apartment. The ex-husband didn't argue and simply handed over the housing documents. After the trial, Garrett had nothing left but to pack his remaining belongings into his car and leave the city. No one knows where he went. Mara, by the way, refused to leave and now sells cosmetics at the mall. After a few months, Tammy returned with her children to her family home. Now there was nothing to remind them of the old environment. Marcus had done a good job renovating. Now Marcus and Tammy are together. Somehow it all worked out so well. They seemed to be just friends, and then one day, love blossomed. Such love that Tammy realized these were real feelings. They haven't told Eric the whole truth yet, and probably never will. Why should he know that he was once betrayed by the closest person? There's one more person in this story who is satisfied with the result. Mrs. Mahone, the head doctor, has been punished. After all, she and Tammy are still in touch. Now Tammy, her children, and her husband visit her regularly. They even helped renovate her house with the money she received from Garrett. With the money Tammy received from Garrett, she was able to open a small photo studio. Now she's even a famous in-demand photographer at various celebrations, birthdays, anniversaries, and weddings. She especially likes shooting weddings. Every now and then, she whispers to herself, "This is true happiness."